The courtroom was filled with the usual noise, papers shuffling, footsteps echoing, quiet whispers in the back rows. For Judge Eleanor Hayes, it was supposed to be just another case, another day in her long career. But the moment the defendant walked in, her heart skipped a beat. Shackled at the wrists and ankles stood James Anderson, the boy who once rode bicycles with her on summer afternoons, the friend who had shared dreams under the stars. Now he was accused of robbery and assault. As their eyes met, Eleanor realized this trial would change everything, not just for him, but for her too. Judge Eleanor Hayes had built her life on discipline, hard work, and an unshakable belief in fairness. To the world, she was the model of professionalism, calm, steady, and guided by the law. Each morning she walked into the courtroom with the same routine, determined to treat every case with balance and care. But beneath the black robe and polished bench, she was still human. And when James Anderson's name was called, the past came rushing back like a storm she thought she had buried. James had not always been another name in the system. Years ago, he had been the boy who grew up on the other side of town, in a neighborhood where opportunity rarely knocked. They had met by accident near a creek, a simple moment that sparked a friendship stronger than the quiet rules of their divided town. Eleanor had lived in a modest house with a white fence, James in a weathered home surrounded by fields. Their friendship crossed lines that many didn't want to see crossed, and both of them paid the price. When Eleanor's father discovered their bond, he ended it with the cold authority of a man unwilling to bend. Soon after, James's family moved away. Eleanor buried herself in school, pushing forward, determined to escape the narrow life of Hammond, Louisiana. She studied, excelled, and rose into the respected seat she now held. But James, his path had been different. Now, as he stood accused of crimes that could end his freedom forever, Eleanor felt the past collide with the present. She could not show it on her face, but inside, her heart was in turmoil. The boy who once dreamed of leaving Hammond for a better world was now fighting for his life in her courtroom. The trial began like any other, but Eleanor could not ignore the weight pressing on her chest. The prosecutor painted James as a dangerous man, a thief who had attacked a store clerk before stealing money from the register. His words were sharp, cold, and without mercy. To him, James was not a person with a history, but just another criminal, in a file. The evidence was laid out. The clerk's testimony, grainy surveillance footage, and the fact that James was found walking nearby. Yet as Eleanor listened, cracks began to appear. The clerk admitted he had not clearly seen the attacker's face. The video was blurry, too dark to identify anyone with certainty. Even the arresting officer admitted James was stopped simply because he matched the description, a vague description that could have fit hundreds of men. Still, the weight of assumption pressed heavily on James, as it had all his life. Eleanor sat silently, holding her gavel, her mind torn between duty and memory. She remembered the boy who once dreamed of escaping their small, divided town. He had spoken often about how unfair the world felt to him, even as a child. Now, here he was, facing the full force of that same world. His shoulders sagged, his eyes tired, but beneath the years of hardship, Eleanor could still see the boy she once knew. The defense attorney, young but fearless, fought back with precision. She reminded the jury that no physical evidence tied James to the crime. The so-called red hoodie the suspect was wearing had never been found. The officer had not bothered to search the area. She even brought in an expert who showed the video footage could not reliably prove James's identity. Piece by piece, she pulled apart the case, leaving the jury unsettled. But Eleanor knew how powerful prejudice could be. The whispers in the courtroom, the glances from the spectators, the way some jurors crossed their arms whenever James was mentioned, it all carried the same old weight. To them, he was not just James Anderson. He was a black man accused of a crime. That, too often, was enough. As the trial dragged on, Eleanor's heart ached with every moment. She wanted to reach across the distance, to ask James what had happened in all the years since they last saw each other. She wanted to know if life had given him any chances at all, but she couldn't. Her role forced her to remain distant, silent, a figure of law rather than memory. The more she listened, the more the case became bigger than James alone. It was about how easily lives could be crushed by bias, how quickly a system could label someone guilty before the truth was even known. Eleanor realized this trial was more than a test for James. It was a test for her, for the jury, and for the justice she had sworn to uphold. And as the defense prepared to call James to the stand, the tension in the room thickened. The boy who had once dreamed of freedom would finally speak for himself. Everyone waited, the air heavy with expectation. When James finally took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He was not polished or practiced like the lawyers around him. His voice was rough, carrying years of struggle, but there was something in his words that cut through the noise. He spoke not only of the night in question, but of a lifetime of being judged before being heard. He told the jury that he had been walking home when the police stopped him. He explained how they never asked questions, never searched for real proof, but simply decided he was guilty because he fit the description. His eyes lowered as he admitted he had made mistakes in his life. Small arrests, wrong choices, but he insisted this crime was not his. He was tired, he said, tired of fighting to be seen as a man and not just a suspect. The room hung on every word. Some jurors shifted in their seats, uneasy. For the first time, the image of James as a criminal began to blur, replaced by the image of a man carrying the weight of a system stacked against him. Eleanor sat frozen behind the bench. Each word pulled her back to their childhood, the afternoons by the creek, the whispered dreams under the stars, the promises of escape. She remembered how her father had torn them apart and how powerless James had looked that day. Now, years later, she saw the same weight in his eyes. The prosecutor tried to strike back, calling James unreliable, pointing to his past arrests, but the defense pushed harder, reminding the jury that a record of poverty-driven mistakes was not proof of this crime. The evidence was weak, the testimony uncertain, and the video unreliable. The tension was unbearable. This was more than a case. It was James's life, his freedom, his chance to be seen as more than the labels forced on him. Every face in the jury box carried the power to decide his fate. Eleanor could do nothing but watch, her heart pounding, as the jury prepared to make their choice. The jury disappeared into the deliberation room, leaving the courtroom heavy with silence. Hours passed, each minute stretching like an eternity. James sat still, his hands clasped tightly together, as if holding on to the last thread of hope. Eleanor watched from the bench, her expression calm, though inside she was torn apart. She had promised herself never to let personal feelings sway her work, but this case had reminded her that justice was never truly separate from humanity. When the jury returned, the air grew thick with suspense. The foreperson stood, her hands trembling as she unfolded the paper. The words rang out, "Not guilty." A wave of gasps and murmurs swept through the room. Some faces showed relief, others disbelief. James closed his eyes for a long moment, his shoulders lowering as if a weight had been lifted, though his expression remained unreadable. He had won his freedom, but the scars of the fight were carved deep. Eleanor struck her gavel, restoring order. She declared the trial closed, her voice steady, yet her heart was anything but. As the courtroom emptied, James prepared to leave. For a moment, it seemed he might walk out without a word. But then he paused, turned, and looked up at her. His eyes carried both hurt and understanding. He didn't need to say much. The silence between them spoke louder than words ever could. When he finally walked out into the sunlight, Eleanor remained, seated, staring at the empty courtroom. She knew this verdict was more than a single man's freedom. It was a reminder of how fragile justice could be, how easily truth could be lost beneath assumptions and prejudice. As she left the bench that evening, the fading light cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. Eleanor made a quiet vow to herself. She would no longer be just a keeper of rules, but a voice for change. She could not undo the past, but she could use her power to fight for a future where fairness meant more than a promise on paper. And as she walked into the night, one question lingered. How many others like James were still waiting for justice? If you've experienced or witnessed injustice, share your story in the comments. I might even make a video about it to raise awareness and justice. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so together we can spread the message further.